Welcome to Political Risk Analysis. This is Unit 1 of the 12-unit course. Unit 1 will introduce the course. The agenda for Unit 1 is first an introduction to the Political Risk Analysis field, PRA. Second, defining risk. Third, examine the evolution of political risk analysis. Fourth, look at the characteristics of political risk analysis. And finally, at Ian Bremmer's fat tail concept. Political risk analysis was developed principally by the private sector and first came to prominence during the 1970s oil crisis, when a number of Middle Eastern oil-producing countries initiated an oil embargo. Energy firms sought a way to better understand and anticipate how political developments impact their business in what became at times a turbulent environment. Political risk analysis was originally designed for guiding investment decisions and complex decision making, and a way of reorganizing or anticipating political risk. Key areas of political risk analysts thought was a great way to better anticipate new investment codes, political upheaval producing forced divestiture, or breakdown of administrative processes in countries. Political risks are not just a challenge for private companies. Government departments can greatly benefit from the field too. For example, the US Department of Defense has had to carefully navigate the politics of countries that its land and air logistical supply lines cover. For example, the land Afghanistan route starts in Germany, then into Austria, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and after a hop over the Caspian Sea to Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Political risk impacts can be seen in the 2008 financial crisis and the ongoing Eurozone troubles, for example. Also, Argentina's expropriation of Spanish firm Repsol's stake in Argentina. Climate change policy, food contamination, perceived risks of nuclear power stations, especially after the Fukushima accident in 2011, and how significant demographic changes are handled, for example, the rapidly rising elderly populations in the US and Japan. Political risk analysis is not just about sudden changes. It is also about slow but significant changes. The boiling frog concept, whereby a slow increase in water temperature of a frog being in a pot happens too slowly for the frog to realize it is too hot until it is too late. As analysts, we therefore also need to detect those slow but potentially game-changing and dramatic events. Before we define political risk analysis, let's define risk. Risk is an abstract and multidimensional concept. Below are varying definitions of risk over time. First, we have the possibility of an unfavourable deviation from expectations by James Athian in 1969. Catastrophe in its latent form by Kay Freedom in 1987. The variability of future outcomes by Etid Baronoff in 2004. Future random occurrence that can be statistically calculated according to the probability by Ragnar Lofsted in 2009. Finally, we have any other definition that makes sense in the context, from the Society of Risk Analysis in 1980. Importantly, we must see risk both as an opportunity and a negative attribute. Companies, for example, should see political risk analysis as the ability not just to explore and understand potential negative features, but also opportunities for expanding growth and new market opportunities, having carefully assessed the information. Let's now define political risk analysis. There are several definitions. The impact of politics and markets by Ian Bremmer. The probability that business will either earn less money or suffer losses in profit as a result of stakeholders within political systems, inactions or reactions to events, decisions and policies. That one by Charlotte Brink. And finally, political risk is a mediating relationship between state and non-state economic actors. And that by Darryl Jarvis. A common theme you may see here is that there is a lot of business focus to them. But we want to be broader than that to include public sector and NGOs as well. The definition for this course is: political risk analysis is a multidisciplinary field of study which analyses, measures, manages and mitigates the impact of political risk to foreign and domestic businesses and investments, organisations and individuals. Political risk emanates from the actions and inactions or reactions of stakeholders within the political system to events. You may have better suggestions on the definition, which is perfectly fine. Like defining terrorism, there are many valid definitions out there. What is good about this definition is that it looks at public and private sector organisations. Second, the last sentence emphasises that it's not just what developments occur, but what does not occur. That is also equally important. Actions and inactions. Now we turn to the evolution of political risk analysis as outlined in Darryl Jarvis' article, Learning to Fly. The first generation approach, the catalogue school. Here we have unwanted consequences of political activity or the aggregate negative effect of government actions. Political risk stems from political intrusion. It infers markets near perfect, self-regulating and prone to equilibrium. However, it artificially dismembers markets and business relations from their socio-political context and sees all political activity as negative, market distorting and detrimental to business. The second generation approach, the system event school. The second generation understands the mutually constitutive nature of political systems and markets. Economic modernisation can create political risk and radical political change. However, it looks only at political events and system structure. Also, it cannot establish direct correlations between these events and the impact upon firms. Third generation of political risk approach, method versus theory. This aims less towards grand theoretical correlations and more towards informed micro-analysis that emphasises the importance of context and focus on project-level analysis. Rather than attempt to develop explanatory schema with predictive capacity, the third generation develops methods to evaluate the risk environment in relation to industry or project-specific applications. The holy grail of political risk theorizing, quantitative models, testable propositions, or datasets relate accurate probability indices to specific events, policy changes, or country settings, remains a highly prized goal, despite its difficulties. Finally, the fourth generation. Here developments include an early warning dashboard to alert political risk developments. Risk databases are developed that attempt to correlate and or identify specific trigger points with particular risk events, such as humanitarian crisis, state failure and ethnic conflict. This generation moves risk analysis into a fully fledged early warning system with, for example, the Canadian Institute for Foreign Policy's 9 composite risk indicators: armed conflict, governance and political stability, militarization, population heterogeneity, demographic stress, economic performance, human development, environmental stress, and international linkages. This is the first time that you get all of these factors. You can read more about CIFP in Unit 9, Political Risk Modelling. Each composite indicator can be related to any combination or all of the other composite indicators. Now I want to turn to the characteristics of political risk analysis to highlight the diverse and growing field. You have traditional political risk analysis areas and newer areas coming more on board now. More traditional ones that you typically saw from the early days of the field include expropriation, regulation, capital markets, modelling techniques, risk mitigation and management strategies, and demographics. Newer political risk analysis areas include risk perception and risk communication, future tools and wargaming, and there's more to come. Therefore, think of political risk analysis as providing you with a toolbox. You will then need to decide what tools or tool are most appropriate for the situation that you are dealing with. There are a couple of more characteristics I want to run through with you. PRA is multidisciplinary. It may lack clearly defined boundaries, but it's enriched by different disciplines. So on to country risk versus political risk. To differentiate the two here's an example. Country risk is a country's ability to repay a loan. Political risk is the willingness of the country to pay, for example, domestic reasons. Next, economics only explains so much. PRA provides a more enriched perspective. We look at macro, national and micro industry specific areas. The risk society concept is that despite we are generally healthy and live longer than previous generations, we may believe that there are many risks around us, for example, from pollution, what we eat, drink, and how we travel. Finally, it is worth noting that elaborate risk analysis systems can breed false confidence. It is only as good as it is designed. An example is the credit ratings given to subprime mortgages in the lead up to the 2008 US subprime mortgage crisis. Letter grades were used to denote the quality of the packages, but what may have looked good in the ratings later proved to be much the opposite. So when we do develop models and dashboards, we need to routinely assess the robustness of the approach and be aware of its strengths and weaknesses. Finally, I want to turn to Ian Bremmer's fat tail concept. Many of the risks we face do not follow a normal distribution. Normally, we think of distribution as a bell curve, as shown in the top image here. But risks we face do not follow normal distributions, but highly skewed. As Nicholas Taleb states in his Black Swan book, we should really expect unexpected things to happen more often than expected or statistical models would say. This is the fat tail we see in the bottom image on the left hand side. Bremmer notes that fat tails are the unexpectedly thick tails or bulges that we find on the tail ends of distribution curves that measures risks and their impact. They represent the risk that a particular event will occur that appears so catastrophically damaging, unlikely to happen, and difficult to predict that many of us choose to simply ignore it. Well, that wraps up the introduction to political risk analysis. Thank you for your time.